In the previous video, I showed you how to use Obsidian, but just the basics. Showed you how to make notes, how to make folders, how to do a little bit of Markdown. But in this one, I'm going to show you how to start outlining a book. Now, the topic we're going to use in this particular case is a book by Plato, because I happen to be making this second video for my class on ancient Greek history, and we're reading some Plato. Now, I have this example vault already open that we created in the last video. So what would I do? I'm going to work on this book by Plato. We're going to use Crito. And I need to start putting the outline somewhere. What do we do? Okay. So I've already got a folder for my presentations. This one is not primarily about making a presentation. This one is about making notes. So I'm going to create a new folder, and this is going to be my primary folder for notes. So in here, what am I going to do? I can go ahead and create a folder for any sort of other subnotes I want to make, or I can just start throwing notes in here right as it is. Now, however you want to do this, it's entirely up to you, and you will certainly, as you use Obsidian for a while, decide that you want to change things around. And okay, I want to do it one way, and then a week later you go, no, I'm going to reorganize another way. That's entirely normal and good. You don't have to follow what I do. I'm just going to start by here creating a folder for sources. So in mine, for sources, this could mean blog posts, this could mean books, this could mean articles, whatever. I'm going to put notes specific to sources of information in that folder. Now I want this in my notes folder, and so it created it down there. I want to just drag it in there, and this is where I'll put my sources. And so I'm going to create a note called Plato Crito, since this is the book I'm going to be working on. All right, so let me grab my outline. Okay, so this is my long outline. What do I say by long outline? Well, I read through Crito, and basic thoughts, important things that popped out to me. I thought, you know what, I'm going to make a note on that. And what I've got here is everything is here in a list. And so if we recall from the last video, that means things started with a dash. So you've got first the number, and this is the Stephanus number. This is not the page number in the book. This is the standard reference for Plato's works. And so I'm going to start here with 43c. This is the beginning. And I put notes on what's going on. All right, who's talking, major arguments, things like that. And so here at the beginning, we've got, okay, a discussion of the ship whose voyage delayed Socrates' death, arrived at Sunion, and will likely arrive on Athens that day. If you read the book, then that will make more sense, or if you know more about Plato. And then as we go through, Crito is going to argue with Socrates. And so these are the two main characters, Crito and Socrates. And so Crito here makes, for example, an argument. The majority can do a great deal of harm, so they should not be ignored. We need to do things that'll make the majority, that'll make the mob happy. And Socrates disagrees, and so forth. And so there's a little bit of a back and forth through this. And so I've got notes, as you can see, going through. And then when you get to 46b, it's primarily Socrates talking, for sure. And so he starts making arguments. And then when you get to 50, then you can see, okay, now what he does is he creates a dialogue between himself and the polis and the city. And so it's basically a dialogue between the city and Socrates, but Socrates is talking as if he's the city and making an argument. And this whole book is ultimately around, well, Socrates is about to be put to death, and Crito is trying to talk him into escaping, and he will use his money to help in this escape. And Socrates is thinking through what's going on and going, well, let's only do this if this is the just thing to do, if this is the right thing to do. And ultimately, in the end, Socrates convinces Crito that him escaping is actually a bad idea, and he is going to go to his death willingly, and does in fact do so. And so that's what this whole book is about. And so I've got a basic outline of all the major items. And this right here will allow me, as a note taker, to come in and access various things in Crito and even search for, all right, where in Crito did maybe Socrates talk about this particular topic? So I can do Control F or Command F if you're on the Mac, and I can type and say, okay, where did he talk about justice? And so I can see various places about justice and whatnot. So here's just sort of a longer outline of here's just stuff that kind of happened. I do that, but that's not where I end up. All right, this gives me the basic running script of the thing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to boil that down to something that's a little bit more condensed, because this is just sort of thread of thought. Here's what happened. Can I condense this to something that really talks more about the structure of the work? And I think I can. And so here's what my shorter outline would look like. Now, because I can subdivide this note into things, I'm going to say long outline. And then up here, I will put my short outline. And here it is. So this right here is something I created based on the long outline below. And so I read through the book, I made all my notes, then I came back and I rethought through the book and rethought through the argument to figure out, okay, what's the big pieces within the context of this particular book? And so there's this first part, which is just basically set up. Socrates is in prison, awaiting his death. And then what's the second piece? Crito's argument. Crito is going to lay out his argument for why Socrates needs to let him help him break out of jail to avoid death. And he brings various different arguments to talk Socrates into doing that. Then you've got a much longer section, 46b through 50a, and then 50a through 54c, two sections where Socrates argues with Crito that this is the wrong way of doing it. First, he speaks as himself and just does some regular arguments. And then he speaks as if he is the polis, if he is the city of Athens, speaking on behalf of Athens, and why Socrates' disobedience to the laws by trying to escape would be an injustice. And then finally, at the very end, Crito submits to Socrates' argument and the thing is over. So this is the short outline. And so now what I would do is actually I would combine these two. The short outline by itself is good, but I can just combine these. And the way that would look in Obsidian would look something like this. Okay, so here's the short line and the long outline combined. I take the short outline, and that is the first level of the indentation for the outline. Then everything else, I just hit Tab, and that scoots things over to the right. Or if I do Shift Tab, things scoot over to the left. And so if the first item in the short outline was 43 through 44b, then that's going to be everything here, and that's going to be indented within that. And so what you can see is you can see sort of the structure here within the outline. And so this section has a number of different notes. This section has a number of different notes in it, and so forth. And so that's how I would build an outline gradually of the book. First, I read through the whole book. I take notes on individual items and basically get myself an idea of what's there. Then I make a shorter outline. Now, if this was a long book, what I would probably do is not do a long outline of the entire book. I would maybe do a chapter at a time. I would do the long outline, just make notes on the whole chapter, then go back and think about, all right, what's the structure? And in some books and some chapters, they're actually going to help you with this. They're going to give you subheadings and whatnot. And when that's the case, then you'll just often use those to help you structure what you've got. But I didn't have that for Crito, and so I had to create that myself. So create the long outline, the short outline, and then I kept a copy of the short outline because it's good for review, but then I combined them together. Okay, so now that we have our outlines, what should we do next? Well, when we read things, what we should often do is think about, all right, what are some of the main ideas? We have an outline. Are there particularly important ideas that we want to bring out of this? Maybe to separate into separate notes. Maybe to separate into just something to think about related to that particular work. And also, if you've got some important ideas that you can bring into separate notes or important characters, Then later on, as you do more outlines or you do more research or you make more notes, having those broken down into separate notes makes it easier for you to reference them. So let's start with this latter thing. And let's create just some notes to link to that we can build on in later reading and later research. And so in the dialogues of Plato, generally speaking, you're going to have some major characters. This one only has 2. I think it's worth pulling those out as something separate. And so who's the major characters? Socrates is usually the major character, not always. And then Crito. Now, I want to create separate notes, and so I'm going to double square bracket for that. And if I click on that link, it'll actually create the note for me. Now, it's not where I want it to be. I actually want this in my notes, so I'll just drag it up here. And so I've got my note on Socrates. All right, Socrates, who is he? Philosopher, cool dude, whatever you want to put. You might want to put in here like the dates that he lived. Any other notes you want to put for Socrates, what you don't really have to do is you don't even have to put anything in this note. This note actually becomes something useful as you have other works that just link to it. But putting his date or any information about him would make sense to do that here. Let's go back to our work. I can actually get back there by just clicking on that note, or if I go back to the backlinks, I can see that, okay, here's Socrates. It's linked to here in the Plato Crito note. All right, what about Crito? Now, we could create a note for Crito, but we already have a note for Plato-Crito, which is the work. How do we distinguish the man from the work? Well, let's do that by creating a note with more like a full name for him. All right, and so we're going to call him because this is where he's from. I'm going to go to notes. I'm going to create a new note and say Crito of Allopis. All right, so that's his name. So who is Crito? Crito is a rich friend of Socrates. Oh, and since he's a rich friend of Socrates, I can put a link right there. And so I can go straight over to Socrates from there because everything is linked. You can sort of think of when you're doing this, you have like your own little Wikipedia that you're making, but with your notes, with whatever you want in there. And so here I can link from Crito all the way to Socrates, and then I can go back to the book and I can see, okay, here's Socrates. Well, Crito, well, I made the note named Crito of Allopis. So one thing I can do is just do double brackets here and then pick Crito of Allopis. And so those notes are created. So that's how you could start building notes. And since Crito shows up in multiple dialogues of Plato, if you do outlines of multiple dialogues, then you're going to have multiple ones linking to Crito. And then, of course, you can get back to those notes from Crito himself because you can go there and then look at linked mentions here to see where Crito is mentioned. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, and this is probably more important, is as you think through works and you pull out significant ideas, it would be great for you to pull out those ideas as separate notes. And so, for example, one of the big ideas in this particular work is that instead of listening to the mob, instead of listening to the mass of people in the city or the mass of people around you, if you want to genericize that, instead of listening to them, you should listen to the wise. The analogy that Plato uses here is essentially, if you want to figure out how to be healthy, and if you want to figure out how to exercise well, who do you talk to? Do you talk to random folks and get everybody's opinion, or do you talk to somebody who knows something about this? Well, of course, you don't want to just talk to everybody. You want to talk to the people who know things about this. This is your analogy. This is why, part of his argument is, this is why you should not pay attention to the mob. This is why you should not just pay attention to the mass of humanity who want or say something. Of course, in this particular case, the mob he's talking about is the people of Athens. You shouldn't just listen to all of them. What you should do is you should listen to the wise. And so that's a major idea. And so we've got our outlines up here. What we can do is we can create a new section down here. And we can say thoughts. And if we go over to our outline, we can see that now over here on the right-hand side. So our thoughts. What are our thoughts? Well, one of the major thoughts is we should listen to the wise, not the mob. Right? So that's a major thought here. What are some other thoughts here? Well, there are some in here that maybe I need to think about more because I'm not sure they're good advice. This is good advice, but what about other things? Like one thing he said, for example, is the mob can't do good or evil because it can't make people wise or foolish. All right, so I'm not sure I agree with that. Now, where is this? This is in 44D. Up here in my outline, I actually put a quote. I just dropped the whole statement of Socrates up here. Would that the majority could inflict the greatest evils, for they would then be capable of the greatest good, and that would be fine. But now they cannot do either. They cannot make a man either wise or foolish, but they inflict things haphazardly. Is Socrates right? I actually have some opinions, but I'm not going to share them here. So let's say I'm not sure. I might put that down here, and so this becomes a question for thought. Is this true? Another thing that I think is very much worth thinking about, because this is a major part of this particular work, is what is the relationship between a person and the government he lives under. Right? In this particular case, the highest government in Socrates' life was Athens. There was no country of Greece at the time that had a law that everybody had to listen to and a king that ruled them all. It was a city-state, essentially, and Athens was it. So what was Socrates' idea about how the person and the city related? And what are some ideas there? Well, one thing that he talked about is maybe the city is more important than your family. Maybe you owe more to the city than the family, and so that should maybe affect some of your judgments. Do you believe that or not? Do you believe that about the state? Do you believe that about the federal government? Interesting thoughts. And so I'm going to put in here, what exactly is the relationship between someone and their government? And this is Socrates' whole argument, where Socrates portrays the city, personifies the city, and has the city talk to Socrates about the injustice of escaping his upcoming punishment of being put to death. Okay? And so those are some thoughts. Now, I'm not sure about the last two. I am sure about the first one. We should, in fact, listen to the wise, not listen necessarily to the mob. If that's the case, well, maybe that's worth putting into a separate note. So I'm going to I just copied that whole thing. Here's another way of making notes. And then I just put the double brackets around it. If I click on this, it'll create the note in the wrong place. But since I just copied it, I can go to notes and I can plop that in there, paste what I just typed, and just have this note here and ready to type in it. So I'm going to say, for example, if you want advice on health or exercise, you would consult someone who knows about such things. In the same way, you ought not to listen to the mob. Instead, listen only to the wise. In our case, the mob might just be social media. Or maybe it's most of your friends, because your friends may or may not be wise. Depends on your friends. And so we've got a separate note. This note represents a single idea. And that idea is that we should listen to the wise and not the mob. And now what we can do is we can then reference this note from other places. Like if Socrates at any other place talks about the same idea, then we can link to that from that particular document as well. And you will have to decide as you read things what's important to break out into a separate note or not. I will exemplify things in these videos, and you'll just have to think and decide for yourself what is something important for you. Because often when you're reading things, well, you're going to think something's more important than I will think, and you'll make a separate note because you're looking for different things than I am, and that's totally okay and totally good. So here now we have our Plato outline, we have notes for Socrates and Crito, and we have this one right here that separates this, I think, very good notion out as a separate note. And so that's how I would approach outlining a work. And I will make another video later about how to outline a modern work. But this is how I would do something like Plato. This is also how I might do really any sort of ancient work that has some sort of versification. You'll have some sort of outline that has the versification markers, like so. How do you reference things? And so this is how I would do this. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And in the meantime, enjoy using Obsidian if you're giving it a try.